Hey guys, this is Jen and welcome back to my channel. Before we get started on today's case, if you haven't already, please make sure you click like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of my new videos. Just a quick disclaimer, this video does contain strong themes of domestic abuse, so if that is something that is very triggering to you at this moment, please just keep that in mind and watch at your own discretion. Jumping right into things, in this week's video, we're going to be talking about the horrible abuse and neglect that would sadly lead to Melissa Platt's death. This is a pretty bizarre case because to this day, the manner of death has been labeled undetermined, but the case has been closed. However, Melissa's family and many others believe that Melissa was the victim of very severe abuse and neglect, and that was the cause of her death. The person who's believed to be responsible for Melissa's death is still a free man and has not been charged by the authorities. Her family has been working for over a decade now to try to bring justice for Melissa's death. I honestly feel like this case has not been given the media coverage that it deserves, so I'm hoping that by sharing this with you guys on my channel, it will help to bring some awareness to this case, and if it's able to help the family in any sort of way, then that would be amazing. But again, just before we get into the details, this really does contain a lot of details of domestic abuse, so if that is not something that you are able to really listen to right now, it's completely fine, and I'm more than happy to see you in my next video if this one is not the one for you. Alright, let's jump into the case now. Melissa Platt was born on February 3rd, 1977 in Houston, Texas. Melissa grew up with two sisters and led a relatively happy and normal childhood. She was also a very adventurous and all-around happy person. She was also really close to both of her sisters and to her parents, so overall she had a very nice, loving, and supportive home. As an adult, while living in Jacksonville, North Carolina, Melissa would end up marrying a man who she would have her first daughter with. Her first daughter was Brianna, who was born in October of 1995. In July of 2003, Melissa would then go on to have her second daughter, Chastity. I believe that Melissa was married to the father of her children from 2001 to 2005, but unfortunately that marriage did not last. It did end sadly in a divorce, and it seems that towards the end of her divorce, Melissa was struggling quite a bit with her personal life. In 2005, it seems that Melissa had gotten herself in some sort of legal trouble. I believe that she was found guilty of writing bad checks in 2004. She eventually did end up on probation, and due to the fact that she was struggling personally with a lot of different things, she did end up drinking a lot and being unable to care for her daughters, so eventually her daughters had to go to somebody else in the family and had to be cared for by somebody else. Sometime in 2006, Melissa would meet a man named Joey Tyndall. Joey and Melissa would go on to have a very difficult and toxic relationship. Joey and Melissa met in Jacksonville, North Carolina in an auto parts store that Melissa was working in at that time. I'm not exactly sure how old Joey was at that time, but I do know that he was a few years older than Melissa and he worked as a truck driver, so he must have been a customer of the shop that Melissa was working at. Shortly after, Melissa would move in with Joey and they would live in a single wide home in Rex Howard Pink Hill, North Carolina. Pink Hill is an outskirt farm town just outside of Jacksonville, so really it's just a lot of open fields with random houses here and there, just really spread out. And it's a really small town with the population of like 500 something people. According to Melissa's family, Joey was immediately a bad influence on Melissa. Joey was a heavy drinker, and in addition to that, he also had a long history of domestic violence against previous women in his life. The only thing about that is that Melissa and her family weren't aware of his history with other women and of the domestic violence allegations against him. While this relationship could have been a new potential start for Melissa, it would sadly turn out to be anything but that. Once they moved in together, Joey and Melissa's relationship really became centered around alcohol. They would literally just spend their time at home drinking all day. Joey had a tendency to drink a lot of hard liquor, and when he would drink this hard liquor, he would also take Paxil, which is basically an antidepressant. And according to what Melissa had told her family, when Joey would mix this medication with hard liquor, he would become really violent. And interestingly enough, in interviews with Joey's own children, his children did confirm that Joey, you know, when he had spent time with them, would drink constantly and would constantly also mix medication, and that this would lead him to becoming very violent because he would be so drunk and high. Melissa was typically a beer drinker, but when she started dating Joey, she was sort of roped into drinking hard liquor, and so she just gave up beer and just started drinking real hard liquor. And honestly, hard liquor mixed in with her current mental state was just a really bad match for her. It really did push her deeper into a difficult situation and left her feeling really vulnerable and just in a not good place. And at one point it gets so bad that she even realizes it and reaches out to her family and tells them that she's scared, that she's just out of control, she can't control her drinking, and she's just really scared of the path that she's on. Again, she admits to them that she really is not in control of her drinking anymore, like she's fully addicted to alcohol, hard liquor, and that she's feeling pressured by Joey to drink all the time. Because of this, Melissa decides to check herself into the Onslow County Behavioral Health Clinic in Jacksonville, North Carolina. However, she does end up checking herself out just a few days after. According to what Melissa had told her family, Melissa ended up checking out like a few days after checking in because she was receiving threatening messages from Joey. Joey had apparently told her that if she continued to try to go to rehab or to seek help for her drinking, that he would kick her out and that he would end his relationship with her. What's really sad is that I believe she's tried to seek help a few times now, whether it's through rehab or even going home to Texas where her family was, so that she could get away from Joey and just try to like get clean. But every single time she would do this, he would threaten her and say like, I'm gonna kick you out of our home and we're gonna break up and you're gonna have nowhere to go, and that just really caused her to feel trapped in the relationship, and she honestly felt like she had nowhere to go. There were multiple times where he would kick her out of their home, like physically push her out of their house, and she just didn't have anywhere to go. She would just sleep in the backseat of her car. Her family did beg for Melissa to go back to Texas where they were currently living and to leave North Carolina and to leave the relationship, but manipulation and abuse is something that's incredibly difficult to understand if you've not lived through it. Because of the manipulation and the abuse that she was experiencing and her current mental state and her addictions, she truly did feel trapped, and it's just really difficult to fully understand what she was going through because it's just a really dark place. She truly felt like she had no escape, she had nowhere to go, and that's why she refused to leave, or if she did leave, she would come back. So when you take into consideration all of the factors involved, like her addiction, the abuse that was going on, her current struggles and mental state, it was all just truly a recipe for disaster. And things would really take a horrible turn on Wednesday, October 8th of 2008. So on Wednesday, October 8th of 2008, Melissa's mother, Marion, would make a call to Melissa's probation officer, John Murray, because she was beginning to worry about Melissa's well-being. Melissa was someone who would constantly, like regardless of her situation, she would always stay in touch with her family. She would speak to her family every single day, whether it's her sisters, her dad, her mother, she was always in contact with them. So when her family hadn't heard from her at that point for like a week, they were immediately alarmed. They would try to call her sometimes multiple times a day, and she would either not answer the phone, or if the phone was answered, it would be Joey who would answer. And when Joey would answer the phone, Melissa's family would ask to speak to Melissa, but every single time they asked, Joey would have a new excuse as to why Melissa couldn't come to the phone. There were nights when they would literally call multiple times in one night. I'm talking about 3, 4, 5 times in a span of a few hours, and he would still have excuses as to why Melissa could not come to speak with them. So after a week of Melissa's family still trying to get in touch with her, Joey turns off Melissa's phone, and every time Melissa's family would call, they would get sent straight to voicemail. Shortly after that, Joey starts to disconnect Melissa's voicemail service. So now Melissa's family has no way to get in touch with her. So after Marianne calls John and explains to him the situation, John is like, okay, yeah, that is weird. He decides to take a drive over to Joey and Melissa's house, and he does arrive there on Wednesday at 5:17 p.m. This is 5:17 p.m. on Wednesday, October 8th, 2008. So John goes up to the door and he knocks on the door, but there's no answer. And John knew that Melissa wasn't working these days. She didn't have a job, so there really was nowhere else she would be. She's most likely inside. So he keeps on knocking on the door, but again, there's no answer. Eventually, he starts to get a little bit worried. John had actually met Melissa a week prior to this Wednesday, and when he saw her a week prior, she didn't look that great. She was definitely drinking again. He could smell it on her, and he was aware that she was not doing so well, and he was worried now that maybe she was passed out in the home, like on the floor drunk. He decides to call the police so that he can get help in opening the door, just so he can check whether she's okay or not. So John calls the Lenora County Sheriff's Office, and they end up sending 2 people over, or 2 officers over. And when the officers arrive, John explains to them the situation. The officers then tell him like, hey, look, we can't really just break into somebody's home, so let me just call the homeowner, which was Joey, and ask if we can go and enter his home. The officers eventually do get a hold of Joey on the phone, and he tells them, you know, he's not home, he's at work, but Melissa is most likely in the house. She's been really unwell lately, so she may just be in there resting. And then he goes on to further explain that Melissa's drinking has really been out of control lately, so there's a chance that she could be in there passed out drunk. He also claims that he hasn't been able to take the best care of her, but that he had actually reached out to Melissa's mom, Marianne, multiple times before to try and get her some help and to put her back into rehab, which we know to not be true because Marianne and other members of Melissa's family have not been able to reach Joey or Melissa. But on the call, he never indicated just how bad her situation was. And when I say it's bad, like it's really bad, and we're gonna get into it in just a second. So John and the 2 officers eventually go towards the back of the home, and they enter through the back door with the permission of Joey. They walk into the bedroom and they find Melissa wrapped in a blanket, just laying on a bed. And this is when things become increasingly alarming. They tried to make their presence known to Melissa, and they tried to ask if she needed help, but she was pretty much unresponsive and couldn't respond. However, after a few minutes of the officers trying to continue to make their presence known, they notice that Melissa is trying to move one of her legs as like a response, and she was even trying to nod her head or just make some sort of movement to tell them alive, she's there, she needs help. So the officers immediately see that and see that she's really just in pain or unable to really move around. They know that they need to call the EMTs, so that's what they do. While they're waiting for the EMTs to arrive, the officers do begin to search around the room just to try to figure out like what is going on and like what's happened to Melissa, because this is a pretty strange case, right? Like they just walk in, there's this woman who's just very unresponsive and either really drunk or really unwell. They're not sure. They start trying to figure that out by searching the room and the home, and they were honestly shocked at what they would find. The bed had no sheets on it, and the bed was really dirty and had a weird smell, and Melissa was wrapped around a very small blanket. Even then, it was only covering the top half of her body, and she was actually just fully naked from the waist down. She did have a shirt on, but only her head and one of her arms was through the shirt. It was just a mess. John and the officer did notice that Melissa was shaking very violently as if she was in a lot of pain and very cold. So they did rush over to her and tried to cover her up as best as they could while waiting for medical help. And while trying to cover her up, this is when they realized that she was covered with bruises. And the bruises were in varying stages. Some of them were already kind of healing or fresh bruises, or it looks like they've been there for a few days. She was definitely receiving these bruises on multiple occasions. Like, these bruises happened throughout the span of a few days or a week or more. They also noticed that next to her bed was a bedside table with 2 cups, and each of the cups had straws in them. And when they went to look inside the cups, they would find that the cups were filled with hard liquor. Both of the cups. There was no drinking water anywhere near her. They were just filled with hard liquor. Her bruises were so shocking that the officers at one point even asked her, like, were you beaten? Did somebody do this to you? But Melissa said no, or shook her head no. So the officers were like, well, how the hell did you get all these bruises? Like, what happened to you? And Melissa tried to explain it away by saying that she had fallen while trying to answer her phone. It's really hard to determine how well she communicated this to the officers, because it did take a lot of effort for her to even speak because of how much pain she was truly in. I mean, the whole time that John and the officers were there speaking to her, she really just had her eyes closed the whole time. Like, it really just took too much effort and caused too much pain for her to even open her eyes. She honestly appeared to be in the most horrible pain, and when she was trying to communicate with them, she would only be able to do so in broken words that would come out in whispers. So after some time, the EMTs and Joey arrive at the same time. The EMTs went in through the house through the back door, the same as John and the 2 officers, and in their notes they mentioned that when they walked into the house, the first thing that they noticed was the smell. They noted that they smelled a strong odor of cigarettes and bodily fluids. They stated that they were struck with the smell of someone who had been sitting in their urine and feces for days, and this would turn out to be exactly the case. The EMTs also put down in their notes that when they approached Melissa in the bedroom and when they tried to communicate with her, she was for the most part unresponsive. However, if they spoke really loudly to her, she would respond a little bit by opening her eyes for just a few seconds, but then would immediately close them again because it just seems like she was in too much pain and keeping them open was just too much effort. They would also uncover that her entire body and the mattress that she was laying in was covered in urine, feces, and her own blood. They also specifically noted that she had bruising on her face down to her neck, and that she also had a black eye and a lot of other bruising on her body. Her whole jaw was also swollen, and she had blood pooling in one of her eyes. They also noted that she had a few toes that were broken and that were in the process of healing. So I think this means that in order for her toes to be broken and to be in the process of healing, the toes must have been broken weeks ago. She also did have severe bruising on her pelvic bone and did have blood in her vaginal area, but it was never confirmed if sexual assault was involved. But from the descriptions that I've gathered from her case, I think it could be highly likely. It was very clear from her injuries that this did not just happen in a matter of hours. It must have taken days or weeks or longer for her to be physically hurt and put into this condition. And what blows my mind is that Joey on the phone was basically saying that, you know, he really tried his best to take care of her and that she was unwell. She was in the most horrible physical state, and he never once mentioned it. There was no sense of urgency or alarm in his voice. It seemed like he didn't care. And when the officer asked Joey how this happened to her, like how is she in such a horrible physical state, he explains it away by saying that, oh, she's just really clumsy and falls a lot, so she hurts herself a lot. He even tried to add in a number of bizarre explanations to try and explain away the severity of her injuries and the bodily fluids that she was covered in. I'm not going to even go into all of the bizarre explanations that he tried to give to the officers. There's no way that his explanations make sense. They do not make sense, and it's just such a waste of breath to even go into them. I'm not gonna do that here. However, you can find his interviews online, and I'm sure that he has mentioned some of those explanations in one or two of the interviews that he's done. The EMTs and the officers decide that Melissa needs to be taken to a hospital and needs medical care ASAP. And so they inform Joey of this. Instead of saying, oh yeah, like let me go with you, I'm worried about my girlfriend, like I want to be there with her. He says, actually, I'm not going to be going with you. I'm just going to be staying home and then I'll call in for updates at the hospital. Like what the actual fuck is that about? As a partner, as a boyfriend, and somebody who supposedly loves your girlfriend, you should be showing a lot more concern and care for your girlfriend who is unresponsive and being taken to the emergency room. But no, he's just gonna stay home and he's just gonna chill, have some drinks, and call the hospital for updates when he's ready to, I guess. Upon arriving at the hospital, the doctors did determine that Melissa was suffering from a closed head injury, and they weren't able to provide her with the medical care that she needed at that hospital, so they did need to airlift her over to a different hospital called the Pitt Memorial Hospital in Greenville, North Carolina. Once she was transferred over to the second hospital and the doctors there were able to assess her situation, they did call the officers who were at the scene originally, and they did tell them like, hey, come over and take some photos of the bruises for your investigation. When one of the officers got there, Officer Whitley, he was informed that in addition to all the physical bruises and physical injuries, her internal injuries were just as bad. Officer Whitley even wrote that when he went to see Melissa at the hospital to take the photos for the investigation, he noticed way more bruises than he did when he had seen Melissa at the house. So after the photos were taken by Officer Whitley, the case was handed over to two new detectives called Detective Braden and Detective Herring. So while the investigation is going on and being handled by the two detectives, the doctors at Pitt Memorial did do a CT scan on Melissa, and they did find that she had an intracranial hemorrhage, which is basically caused from physical harm. So it's basically the result of physical trauma. Additionally, her jaw was broken into two pieces, which resulted in bruising and massive swelling in that area. Later on during the testing, Melissa would develop respiratory failure, which is likely from the brain injury due to the insufficient oxygen flow. She also developed tachycardia, which basically means that her heartbeat was racing like way too fast. The doctors determined that that was likely due to the fear, the stress, and the pain that she was experiencing. The next day, due to the extent of her brain injury, Melissa did have to undergo a emergency surgery where they performed a frontal craniotomy, and while performing this surgery, they would find a second bleed in her brain. And the doctors determined that the second brain bleed might have happened in a separate incident, so prior to this most recent incident. The doctors also found that Melissa had been shot in a separate situation from this most recent one. She had been shot and she did receive medical care for it. She apparently told people that she had accidentally shot herself, but her family doesn't believe that that's the story. Her family believes that maybe Joey had something to do with it. So the two new detectives, with all this information that they now have, decide that they should go and speak to Joey. They are new to the case, so they've never spoken to Joey. They've never spoken to Melissa, and they did not see Melissa in the home when she was initially found. They basically just wanted to meet up with Joey and get his side of the story and see, you know, what's going on. They also wanted Joey to show them the different locations around the house or in the house that Melissa had fallen, and he did elaborate a bit more for the detectives when they did come over to to ask him about this. But all of his explanations about, you know, where she had fallen, what time, what day, they were all very general. They never included dates or times or specific conversations between himself and Melissa. He would just say, oh yeah, she fell there. That's it. Like there were no real details in the incidents. And I think the reason for this is because the incidents were made up. So he didn't really have details for that. Everything he said was very much centered around the idea that Melissa was just a crazy drunk and would do this and then fall and hurt herself. Also claims that there was one night when he woke up and Melissa wasn't in bed with him. So he got out of bed and started looking around the home and went outside to try to find her, and he found her naked, sleeping in the backseat of their car. He said that there were some injuries found on her, but that she wasn't bleeding anywhere, and that he believed that she had went out there intoxicated and hurt herself by falling and running into things. Joey also then states that the injuries must have happened over the span of a week or more, and he just had so many explanations for all of the injuries that didn't really add up or didn't really make sense. Let's go back to the fact that Melissa's probation officer, John Murray, had told officers that he had seen Melissa about a week prior to Melissa being put in the hospital. John said that when he had seen Melissa a week prior, he did not see any bruises or injuries on her whatsoever. He only mentions that she was intoxicated, but that was it. So this means everything that must have happened to her physically, the injuries that she received, it must have happened after the meeting with John, which doesn't really align with Joey's statement. And apparently during the interview sessions that the detectives would have with Joey, their conversations were really disturbingly chill, like super chill. It felt more like friends, a group of friends talking, not detectives and a suspect. It was almost as if Joey and the detectives were hitting it off, which to me, considering the circumstances, is highly inappropriate. They literally chatted to Joey about his chickens, random things that was going on in his life, and just a bunch of different topics completely separate from the incident that happened with Melissa. There were a number of times when the conversation or when a question would be asked to Joey that would pertain to Melissa's case, and then the conversation would just completely veer off in the opposite direction. So on the 17th of November, Melissa would end up needing to go through another surgery. At this point, she was essentially suffering from necrosis, which means that her brain was in failure. She was conscious for a very, very brief time after the surgery and was able to speak a little bit, but was still very much out of it. By early November, Melissa would end up developing pneumonia and her health would quickly decline. And by late November, she would have to go through another surgery due to spinal fluid pooling in her brain, and her body just wasn't responding well to recovery. She started having seizures daily that would then turn into seizures every few minutes, and her body was just failing. On December 17th, after it became clear that Melissa wasn't going to recover, her family did have to make the difficult decision to pull her off life support. On December 17th, 2008 at 6:58 p.m., after 9 weeks of fighting for her life, Melissa was pronounced dead. The detectives did visit Melissa to interview her, but they, for some reason, decided to visit her after one of her surgeries. So when they spoke to her, she was obviously very out of it. She had just come out of a surgery. She had told them that she believed she received all of her injuries through a car crash, but then changed it to she has no idea how she received all her injuries. Then she told the detectives that she was clumsy and she fell a lot. Her cause of death was determined to be a result of the brain injury that she sustained, and this was stated after an autopsy was done. However, the manner of her death remained undetermined. Because she was hospitalized for so long, for 9 weeks, and the autopsy was only done after she had passed away, it was really hard to determine whether her death was due to foul play or if it was a result result of her falling. Despite the manner of her death being undetermined, and with all the information that I've found and that I've shared here with you, I honestly don't believe that she fell and hurt herself and died because of that. I honestly believe that this had something to do with somebody else, that somebody else did this to her and that she died because of them. Her family has been trying for the past over a decade now to try to get Joey charged with assault or to get some sort of justice for Melissa, but authorities have been just ignoring them. After Melissa's death, Marion, Melissa's mom, actually did receive a anonymous phone call from somebody stating that Joey had a history of domestic abuse and that he's time and time again like abused and assaulted other women and has gotten away with it. The person on the phone urged Melissa's family to keep trying to press charges and to keep going with the case because he was a horrible person and he needed to be caught. Because of this anonymous phone call, Melissa's family would end up looking into Joey's history and found that Joey had been married twice before. His first marriage ended in divorce in 2001 after Joey reportedly pointed a gun at his ex-wife and 2 children. His 2 children, 2 sons, even corroborated the story to authorities, but he somehow still managed to get away with it. They even stated to authorities that Joey would often physically and mentally abuse their mother and that she would be covered in bruises. His first ex-wife eventually did end up getting a restraining order from him, but it was later dismissed. 6 months later, Joey would then go on to marry his second ex-wife. The marriage lasted 7 months and the ex-wife would file a restraining order against him for domestic violence, and the judge who was in charge of their case ruled that Joey would need to stay away from her for only 1 week. So here are 2 separate women from Joey's past who reported him for what he had done for domestic violence, and they were also ignored. There are a number of accusations against Joey, even from his own sons. One of his sons even stated that when they were younger, they had a sleepover and they had a female friend in the group. And the female friend woke up in the middle of the night to Joey putting his hand down her pants and she screamed, and this caused a big fight. So authorities in the end said that they basically can't charge Joey because he was technically trying to take care of Melissa. Joey claimed that the day before Melissa was found in the home, he had bought home a meatloaf dinner, a nice meatloaf dinner, and had fed it to her. But looking at her swollen jaw, I highly doubt that it was possible that she could have eaten anything. He also claimed in interviews that he had basically done everything he could to try to help Melissa and to take care of her. Authorities stated that Joey was innocent and displayed perfect behavior and compliance with the authorities. So again, they can't charge him. How can he say that he took the best care of her when he didn't give her any water, and I doubt he gave her any food? He had cups of hard liquor just sitting next to her bedside table instead of drinking water. Had her just laying in bed naked, covered in her own blood, feces, and urine, and covered in physical injuries. I just don't understand how that is the definition of him taking good care of her. It just blows my mind that authorities let him get away with this. Melissa's family is still to this day trying to get justice for Melissa's death. I really cannot imagine how much pain she went through or how much pain her family went through or are going through. It's just really shitty that Joey is still a free man. There's just so much injustice in this case, and it just really just makes my blood boil. I cannot even continue to go into it. So that is unfortunately the way this case ends. I really do hope that Melissa's family at some point are able to get justice for Melissa, and that Joey one day is put behind bars for what he's done and he never sees the light of day again. Thank you so much guys for watching my video. I know that that was probably a really heavy case in terms of everything, but if you have made it to the end, thank you so much for sticking it through with me, and I do hope that this brought some sort of awareness about the case to you. Thank you again for watching my video. I hope to see you guys in my next one. Thank you so much guys. Bye.